town banned Halloween, but the curse remains. Julia Hayes gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as the SUV rumbled over the last hill into Grasmere. The town looked perfect at first glance. Rows of neat houses, trees ablaze with red and gold leaves. A quiet serenity she had dreamed of for herself and her 3 children. She had imagined this moment countless times. A fresh start. A small town where life moved slowly, where the streets were safe, and Halloween meant little more than laughter and candy. But as she drove further, an unease settled over her like the autumn fog curling around the edge of the road. No decorations adorned the porches. No painted pumpkins glowed from windowsills. No laughter or music echoed from front lawns. Only stillness, and the silence was oppressive. "Mom?" Eli's voice broke the quiet. 12-year-old eyes wide, fixed on an empty street. "Why isn't anyone decorating?" Julia forced a smile, trying to sound casual. "Maybe they don't do Halloween here. Every town has its own traditions." Sophie, 9, tugged at her sleeve. "Not even candy?" Julia shook her head. "Nope, not even candy." Max, the youngest at 6, pouted. "Can we have a pumpkin? Just one?" She hesitated. "I shouldn't encourage this. It's their first night here. I don't want to upset the town's unspoken rules." But looking at Max's hopeful face, she couldn't say no. "All right," she said softly. "We can have one pumpkin." As she turned into the driveway of the small house at the edge of town, Julia felt the first prickling of unease. The house sat slightly above the street, surrounded by trees whose branches swayed in the wind, scraping against one another in a sound almost like hushed whispers. It looked empty, abandoned even, but cared for, as if it had been waiting. The children tumbled out of the car, their laughter bouncing off the quiet street. Julia watched them cautiously. Their joy was a fragile barrier against the chill crawling up her spine. She pushed open the front door, and the smell of dust and aged wood greeted her. Boxes waited unopened, stacked like silent sentinels in the corners of each room. As she unpacked, Julia noticed small, unsettling things. Shadows shifted where they shouldn't. A flicker of movement at the edge of a window. Gone before she could blink. The faintest whisper of something brushing against the walls. She tried to dismiss it. "It's just the wind. Old houses make noises." Dinner passed in near silence. Outside, the wind tugged at the house, rattling the windows and sending loose leaves skittering across the lawn. Julia found herself glancing at the clock more than usual. "Mom," Eli said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "what really happened here? Why doesn't anyone celebrate Halloween?" Julia paused, slicing vegetables. "I don't know. Maybe something happened a long time ago. Something the town decided to forget." Sophie's eyes grew wide. "Like ghosts?" Julia forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe it's just old stories." After dinner, she carried the small pumpkin to the porch, a pale orange glow flickering from a candle inside. The children pressed close, their excitement bright against the creeping gloom. For a moment, Julia allowed herself to relax, imagining that maybe this simple act would be enough to create a normal Halloween night for them. But the fog had begun creeping up the hill, rolling over the lawn in soft curling tendrils that seemed almost purposeful. Julia shook her head. "It's just fog. Nothing more." The glow from the pumpkin cast long shadows, stretching unnaturally into the mist. Eli gasped as he saw something move, a dark shape darting between the trees. But when he pointed, there was nothing there. Only the fog, curling and swirling as if alive. Sophie clutched Julia's sleeve. "Mom, someone's out there." Julia crouched beside her, trying to steady her own racing heartbeat. "It's just a fog, honey. Nothing more." But as she spoke, she felt it, a gaze pressing through the mist, watching from the edge of the yard. And somewhere beyond the veil of fog, a low whisper echoed, carrying words she could not understand. She shivered and glanced down at her children. They were bright and laughing, unaware of the watching presence. For now, Julia lit another candle in the window, hoping light might keep the creeping dread at bay. The fog shifted closer, curling around the porch railings, and she realized with a tightening in her chest that something in Grasmere didn't want them celebrating Halloween. Something had been waiting, and it was watching. Morning crept slowly into Grasmere, pale and washed in gray. The fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the streets like it had slept there, draped over mailboxes, fences, and tree branches. Julia Hayes stood by the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Outside, the pumpkin still sat on the porch. Its small, flickering candle burned to nothing, but the carved grin seemed deeper now, hollow, almost mocking. She couldn't shake the feeling someone had been watching the house all night. Her youngest, Max, padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, our pumpkin's broken." Julia frowned and stepped outside. The pumpkin hadn't been smashed, but something had clawed it. Not sliced, not cracked, clawed. 3 long, thin grooves ran down one side, like something sharp and deliberate had tested the skin of it. The marks were too precise to be animal, too intentional. She swallowed. Probably just a prank. Kids. Neighbors upset about Halloween. That explanation sat uneasily in her mind. "Can we make another one?" Max asked. "Maybe later," Julia said softly. "Let's just get through today." Later that morning, she drove into the center of town. The fog followed. The streets were quiet, but not empty. People moved silently, glancing up only to stare at her car as it passed. No smiles, no waves, just watchful faces. Grasmere had a small grocery and general store nestled beside a library with boarded basement windows. A plaque stood at the edge of the town square, tarnished and half covered by overgrown ivy. As the children wandered toward the fountain, Julia paused to read it. "In memory of those lost, October 31st, 1985. We do not forget. We do not invite it again." Her heartbeat quickened. Invite what? Inside the store, the bell above the door chimed. The man at the counter, white-haired and hunched, looked up from his newspaper. His eyes, pale blue, almost cloudy, lingered on her. "You're the woman who moved into the Watson place," he said. "Yes," Julia replied cautiously. "I'm Julia Hayes." He didn't offer a smile. Instead, his gaze flicked past her through the fogged glass door. "You lit a pumpkin." It wasn't a question. It sounded closer to an accusation. Julia hesitated. "It was just for the kids. Harmless." "There's nothing harmless about lanterns on porches," he muttered. She frowned. "I don't understand." The old man folded the newspaper slowly, revealing the headline she had only half seen when she walked in. "Grasmere votes to cancel Halloween permanently." Dated October 1986. 39 years ago, he said quietly, eyes never leaving hers, Halloween stopped being a night for costumes and laughter. It became a summons. "A summons?" she repeated, "to something that doesn't belong here." His fingers tightened around the newspaper. "We don't speak of it. We don't decorate. We don't light pumpkins. Because when we do, it comes back." Before she could ask more, Sophie's voice piped up behind her. "Mom, look!" In her hand was a faded flyer taken from a corkboard by the exit door. "Missing. Last seen October 31st, 1985. Below were 6 faces. Teenagers. Smiling. Happy." The old man stepped forward swiftly and plucked the flyer from Sophie's hand. "Those aren't for children to see." Julia's voice was quiet. "What happened to them?" He hesitated, then simply said, "They were the last ones." Walking back to the car, Julia noticed a woman across the street staring at her. The woman's arms were full of groceries, but her gaze was hard, unblinking. Finally, she spoke. "Take the pumpkin down." Julia froze. "Excuse me?" "You don't know this place," the woman whispered. "You don't know what you've woken up." Without another word, she turned and hurried away into the fog. Back at the house, the air felt heavier. As they unpacked groceries, Eli opened a drawer beneath the kitchen counter. "Mom," he said slowly, "what's this?" Inside was a folded newspaper clipping brittle and yellow with age. Someone had tucked it away carefully, hidden, yet preserved. Julia took it and read. Grasmere tragedy. Mayor declares Halloween cursed after 12 dead, 6 missing. The article described a night of fog so thick, lanterns were barely visible, screams heard across the town, and a single survivor. A young girl found at dawn on the church steps, whispering the same 3 words again and again. The lanterns called it. There was no description of what it was. Julia set the clipping down, her hands trembling. That night, after the children slept, she stood on the porch. The pumpkin's candle was out, but the marks remained deep, deliberate. She thought about throwing it away, but something in her resisted. A small, stubborn defiance. This is ridiculous, she muttered to the empty street. It's just a story. A breeze stirred. The fog shifted. Something moved at the end of the yard. Julia squinted into the gray. A silhouette stood motionless by the fence. Too tall, too still, its outline blurred by mist. Hello? She called. No answer. She took a step forward. Another. The figure didn't move. Until it did. It tilted its head, slowly, wrongly. Julia stumbled back toward the door, pulse pounding. She blinked, and the figure was gone, swallowed by fog. The silence that followed felt like a hell breath. She rushed inside, locked the door, turned off the porch light. Just before bed, she went to blow out the candle in the window, then paused. There was something tucked beneath it, a scrap of paper, folded and damp with dew. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Put it out, before it sees. And underneath, in faded red ink, almost brown, we warned you. The fog had grown thick overnight. When Julia awoke, it clung to the porch like a living thing, curling around the railing, pooling in the corners of the yard. The children were quiet, huddled together in their pajamas, faces pale. Even Max seemed subdued. Did you hear it? Sophie whispered. Julia shook her head, though her own pulse had been racing since the previous evening. Hear what, honey? Outside. Footsteps, Sophie said. They came right up to the window. Eli frowned. I didn't hear anything. Julia swallowed hard. Maybe it's just the wind. Old houses make noises. But she didn't believe it. Something in Grasmere had changed since they arrived, and it was watching. Later that morning, Julia drove the kids to school. The streets were still unnaturally quiet, though here and there, faces peeked from behind curtains. No one waved. No one smiled. At the bus stop, Eli's new friend, Timothy Walker, wasn't there. Julia had noticed him before, quiet, a bit withdrawn, always smiling and riding his bike alone. This morning, though, he wasn't smiling. In fact, he wasn't there at all. Where's Tim? Eli asked, glancing down the street. One of the older kids shrugged. I don't know. Didn't see him come this morning. The bus arrived, and Julia gave a polite wave to the driver, though her stomach churned. Something about the absence of Tim felt wrong. By midday, news began to travel fast in the small town. A call to the school office confirmed it. Timothy Walker never showed up. His bike had been found at the edge of Wicker's Hollow, near the abandoned pumpkin fields, standing upright with the front wheel still spinning, but no one in sight. Julia's stomach dropped. Mom, Eli's voice was tight. It's him, isn't it? She knelt beside him. We don't know, honey. We just don't know yet. The fog outside seemed thicker now, curling closer to the house like it had a purpose. The trees rattled as if whispering secrets only they understood. Julia felt her chest tighten. Something was awakening. Later that afternoon, Julia returned to the house alone while the kids were in school. She rifled through the attic again, searching for any clues about what had happened in 1985. Dust coated everything, but she found a small cardboard box filled with old newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed from decades ago. 12 dead, 6 missing. Halloween night horror in Grasmere. Children vanish in thick fog. Lanterns found extinguished. Grasmere mayor declares Halloween banned forever. She read them all carefully. Each one hinted at a pattern. The killer only struck on Halloween. Lanterns were mentioned again and again. Jack-o'-lanterns, candles, lights, always in connection with where children disappeared. And then she found a yellowed letter, folded neatly. The edges were frayed, the ink faded to a reddish brown. It read, "They come for what is taken from them. Do not light. Do not celebrate. They remember every slight. They wait." Julia shivered. The words seemed almost alive, as if they had been written yesterday. She pressed the letter against her chest, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. By the time the children returned home, the town had transformed. The fog pressed against windows, creeping through cracks in the doors. Mailboxes were empty, lawns damp and gleaming under the low light. Julia tried to distract them with homework and snacks, but the atmosphere was suffocating. At the end of the driveway, she thought she saw something or someone moving between the trees. A tall, dark silhouette, still watching. "Mom?" Max whispered, tugging at her sleeve. Julia forced herself to look, and the shape disappeared, swallowed by the fog. Her pulse quickened. "It's just a shadow. Just fog." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. That night, she received another subtle warning. Taped to the front door was a small scrap of paper, soaked with dew. "The first has already been taken. Will yours be next?" Her hand shook as she held it. Eli peered over her shoulder. "Mom, what does it mean?" Julia didn't answer. She couldn't. The thought of Tim, gone, maybe forever, made her stomach twist. She gathered the children close. "We're going to be careful," she said. Her voice trembled despite the attempt at calm. "We're going to stay inside. No lights, no candles. Nothing." But the fog would not respect rules. It pressed against the house, swirling around the windows like smoke, moving as if it had a mind of its own. Shadows shifted inside the house, in corners that had been empty only moments before. Faint scratches echoed from the walls, almost too soft to hear, yet unmistakably deliberate. Julia checked each room, each closet. Nothing. Yet the sensation of being watched only intensified. As she tucked Max into bed, the boy clutched his blanket and whispered, "I think it's outside. It's waiting." She forced a smile, though her lips were stiff with fear. "It's just fog, Max. Just fog." But as she turned to leave the room, she froze. Footsteps, soft, dragging, deliberate, echoed from the hallway outside. Not from her children. Not from the house. Julia's heart pounded in her chest. The footsteps stopped abruptly at the top of the stairs. She strained her ears, listening. Nothing. She crept to the landing. The hallway was empty. No one there. And yet, the temperature had dropped. Her breath fogged in the air. On the wall, near the stair railing, a single mark had appeared overnight. A long scratch, jagged and deep, resembling the clawed marks on the pumpkin from the first night. She stumbled back, heart hammering. "Oh God!" Eli appeared in the doorway. "Mom, it's coming, isn't it?" Julia swallowed hard. She wanted to deny it, to tell him it was just imagination, just fog and shadows. But she couldn't. "Yes," she whispered. "It's coming." Outside, the fog thickened further, rolling along the street like a tide. Somewhere, in its depths, a faint shape moved. Tall, silent, watching, waiting. And in the distance, a single, flickering orange light, like a lantern, appeared far down the road. Julia pulled the children close, heart racing. The first victim had already been taken, and she knew Halloween was not just coming. It had already arrived. Julia barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows kept her alert. The fog still hadn't lifted, and when morning came, it only grew thicker, like the town itself was hiding. When she stepped outside to collect the newspaper, she found a single sheet pinned to her door with a nail. No more lights. No more names. Her stomach twisted. The words were written in neat block letters, the kind that didn't tremble. She yanked the paper down, scanning the street. Curtains shifted. Somewhere a door clicked shut. They were watching her. At the school, parents gathered in tight knots. Conversations stopped when she approached. No one met her eyes. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic. "Did they find Tim Walker?" she asked one of the teachers. The woman hesitated, gaze darting toward the hallway. "They're searching the woods," she said quietly. "But the search parties keep turning back. The fog's too thick." Julia frowned. "You mean the police?" The teacher's face tightened. "Here in Grasmere, everyone searches. Some just know where not to look." "What does that mean?" But the teacher only shook her head and turned away. As Julia walked back to her car, she felt eyes following her. Not one pair. Many. Hidden behind windows, cars, the mist. The sense of being observed settled deep in her bones. That evening, she tried to call the sheriff's office, but the line only crackled with static. No dial tone, no answer. The fog pressed against the windows so thickly now that the world outside was reduced to faint shapes. Lampposts, mailboxes, outlines of houses. Sophie sat on the couch, whispering to herself, tracing patterns on the window with her finger. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Julie asked softly. Sophie looked up. "It's what I saw last night. The man in the fog." Julia froze. "What man?" "The one with the pumpkin head." Eli laughed nervously. "Sophie, that's just..." But Sophie cut him off. "He was real. His face glowed, and I think he saw me." Julia gently pulled her away from the window. "No more stories like that, okay? It's just shadows." But she glanced outside again, and for a moment, she thought she saw what Sophie described. A faint orange glow shifting in the mist. Not a light, something moving. After the children were asleep, Julia sat alone at the kitchen table, newspaper clippings spread before her. There was one detail she hadn't noticed before. Town council forms emergency committee, the Watchers, to ensure compliance with the Halloween ban. Beneath it, a quote from the mayor: "Tradition must not be repeated. Vigilance will protect us." Julia's pulse quickened. The Watchers. She remembered the eyes behind curtains, the notes on her door, the way people whispered when she passed. They weren't afraid of what was coming. They were afraid of her, and they were watching. The house groaned as the wind picked up. Julia checked each lock twice, then turned off the lights. The silence was oppressive. Somewhere in the distance, a sound echoed, a low hum, almost a chant. She went to the window and parted the curtain. Shapes moved in the fog. At first, she thought it was the wind stirring the trees, but then the shapes grew clearer. Figures, standing in a circle at the end of the street. Motionless, silent. Each wore a mask. They weren't the plastic kind from Halloween stores. These were hand-carved, crude, faces shaped from old pumpkins. Hollow eyes, jagged mouths. The faintest flicker of candlelight glowed from within. Julia's breath caught. They stood facing her house, watching. She backed away, heart hammering, and nearly tripped over the table. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The air grew cold. A whisper came from the back door. 3 soft knocks. Then a voice, calm, deliberate, muffled through the wood. "Mrs. Hayes," it said, "you shouldn't have lit the lantern." Julia froze. Her throat tightened. The voice continued, gentle but cold. "You brought it back. You've invited the night." Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, but the line was dead. Eli appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Mom, there are people outside." "I know," she whispered. "Stay upstairs. Keep the lights off." The voice spoke again. "We warned you." She stepped closer to the door, heart pounding. Through the thin curtain of the back window, she saw them, 3 figures in the yard. One held something long and thin like a staff or branch. Another was dragging something across the ground, a burlap sack, leaving a dark trail in the wet grass. "Please," Julia whispered. "We didn't mean to," the voice interrupted. "Intent doesn't matter. The light has been seen. It must be fed." Something heavy struck the door, once, twice. Julia screamed, stumbling back. The knock stopped. The fog outside shifted, retreating slightly, as if waiting. A long silence followed. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper in the fog, a man's voice called out. Timothy Walker is forgiven. Julia covered her mouth. Footsteps moved away from the house. The shapes faded into the mist. When she finally dared to open the door, they were gone. Only the damp grass remained, and a single unlit lantern sitting on the porch steps. Inside it was a note. One light for one life. Keep them dark, Mrs. Hayes. Keep them dark. The fog lay thick over Grasmere as Julia made her way to the library, the headlights of her car cutting only a narrow path through the gray. She felt the eyes again, pressing at the edges of the street, hidden behind curtained windows, abandoned doorways, and shuttered porches. Every so often, a shape moved just out of focus, dissolving into the mist before she could see it clearly. The Grasmere Public Library loomed ahead, its brick walls darkened with age. Inside, the familiar smell of damp paper and varnish was comforting, almost normal. An elderly woman, perched behind the counter, looked up as Julia entered. "You've come," the librarian said quietly. Her name was Martha Klain, and Julia had noticed her watching the children the first day they arrived. The lines on Martha's face were deep, carved from years of worry. Her hands shook slightly as she pushed a small lantern closer to her. "Please, I need to know," Julia said, lowering her voice. "About Halloween, about the disappearances." Martha's eyes darted toward the fog pressing against the library windows. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "Some truths aren't meant for outsiders." "I live here now," Julia insisted. "My kids are here now. I need to protect them." The librarian hesitated. Then, slowly, she opened a hidden drawer beneath the counter. Inside was a small key and a folded bundle of papers. "Restricted archives," Martha said. "Records they tried to destroy decades ago. You'll find the town's history, the part everyone pretends doesn't exist." Julia thanked her and moved toward the back room. The musty smell of aged paper filled the air as she unlocked the cabinet. She pulled out brittle newspapers, faded council reports, and a single leather-bound journal. One document, dated 1973, caught her attention. "Incident on Willow Street. Halloween night," she began to read. It described a small group of townspeople who had cornered a local child during Halloween, convinced that a curse was spreading through the town. Panic and superstition had overtaken reason. Masks were worn, candles lit in a ritualistic pattern, and chants echoed down the empty streets. By morning, the child was dead. The report called it a tragedy. The town council immediately formed a secret committee, later known as the Watchers, tasked with preventing future disasters by repeating the ritual when deemed necessary. Over the years, the killings were disguised as accidents, disappearances, or children wandering off. No one spoke openly about it, but the system had persisted, quietly ensuring the curse never returned. Julia's hands shook as she read. Her children, her family, the names of those who had gone missing on past Halloweens, all carefully recorded. Each had a pattern. Families who dared to celebrate. Lanterns lit, voices calling names into the night. A shadow passed across the window, and Julia's head snapped up. The fog pressed closer, swirling in unnatural patterns. A whisper brushed against her ear, soft and cold. "The light draws them." She spun around, heart pounding. The room was empty. Only the lantern Martha had provided flickered against the wall. "Mrs. Hayes?" Martha's voice came from the doorway. "You've seen too much already." Julia turned to face her. "I need to know the truth." Martha's hands trembled as she folded her arms. The Watchers believe they're protecting the town. But every few decades, someone must be offered. A child, or a family. That's the law they've followed. It's not just superstition anymore. It's habit, ritualized over fear. "Why now? Why my family?" Julia's voice cracked. "The records," Martha whispered, pointing to the cabinet. "This year, it's been 50 years. The original ritual anniversary. They always follow the calendar, every 5 decades. The Watchers, they've chosen you." Julia staggered back. Her hands gripped the counter for support. No, it can't be." Martha placed a hand on hers. "It can't, and it will be if they aren't stopped. You must leave, or hide, or—" The librarian's words were cut off by a sudden gust of wind that rattled the windows and extinguished the lantern. In the darkness, Julia heard the faintest scraping sound across the floor. She fumbled for the light switch. Nothing. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living wall. When her eyes adjusted, the room was empty. Martha was gone. No farewell, no warning, just gone. On the counter lay only her glasses and a small, carved pumpkin mask, candlelight still glowing faintly inside it. Julia felt bile rise in her throat. She picked up the mask. It was small, crude, the eyes jagged, the mouth wide with a permanent grin. A whisper seemed to echo from the hollow inside. "We warned you." Hands trembling, she gathered the papers, shoving them into her bag. The library door groaned as she stepped outside. The fog had thickened, curling around the steps and street lamp posts. Shapes moved in the mist, distant but deliberate. They were not shadows, not ghosts. She realized with a sudden, sickening clarity, these were people. Her family. The kids. Her. Chosen. Back at the house, Julia closed the door and locked it twice. The fog pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating. Outside, she could see faint glimmers, lanterns placed at intervals, one at the edge of the lawn, one across the street. Someone, or some group, was already setting the stage. Then, tucked beneath the welcome mat, she found a folded sheet of paper. Hands shaking, she opened it. The list. It was short. 3 names, written in the same neat block letters as the notes from before. Eli Hayes, Sophie Hayes, Julia Hayes. Her stomach dropped. The letters seemed to burn into her vision. They were marked, selected, already chosen. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of chanting. The fog swirled around her house, curling against the walls as if hungry, as if aware. The streets, once quiet and passive, now seemed alive, watching, waiting. Julia sank to the floor, clutching the list. The weight of the town pressed on her chest. She understood now why Grasmere had banned Halloween so long ago. It wasn't just fear. It was self-preservation. A grotesque, twisted order maintained by silence, ritual, and the blind obedience of its people. And now, she and her children were the next to pay. She whispered their names softly, almost like a prayer, as the fog outside shifted and the faint glow of jack-o'-lanterns winked at her from the street. The town had forgotten itself, but it had not forgotten the dead ode. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Julia's house, once a safe haven, had become a cage. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every whisper just out of reach. Outside she could hear faint movement, soft scraping of feet, the dull shuffle of cloth against cloth. The watchers were near. She had spent the last hour moving quietly through the house, checking locks, gathering the children, and planning the escape. Eli clutched Sophie's hand, both of them pale, silent. Max, too young to understand the depth of danger, shivered under his blanket. Julia's chest tightened at the thought of what could happen if they were caught. "Stay behind me," she whispered, "and don't make a sound." The front door had been reinforced with 2 locks, but Julia knew she could not stay. The notes, the whispers, the masked figures outside, they were organized, patient, relentless. She crept to the back, hoping to slip through the fog unnoticed. The mist swallowed the street, turning familiar shapes into something monstrous. A mailbox looked like a crouching figure. A lamppost became a sentinel. She moved slowly, counting steps, listening. A faint glimmer of light flickered through the fog. A jack-o'-lantern, small, crude, and glowing orange, marked the edge of the street. Her stomach sank. They were here, watching, waiting. Julia clutched the children close as she slipped into the mist. Every sound seemed amplified, her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, the rustle of leaves, the distant hollow whisper of voices she could not fully hear. She had memorized the patterns from the map of the town she had studied in the library. 2 blocks left, then the alley behind the old firehouse, then the highway. The fog thickened as she passed Wicker's Hollow. Shapes shifted in its depths. Tall, still figures with pumpkin masks, always at the edge of vision. She avoided the main streets, sticking to shadows, ducking behind abandoned cars and hedges. Her hands were clammy, her breath ragged. Every step could be the one that drew attention. A sudden scraping sound made her freeze. A figure stepped from the fog, masked, silent. Julia pressed herself against the wall, holding the children close. The figure paused, then turned and disappeared into the mist. Her pulse slowed only slightly. She moved faster. Finally, she reached the alley behind the firehouse. The darkness here was almost complete, but it gave her cover. She could hear the faint hum of voices behind her. Footsteps approached, then receded. Someone, or some group, was systematically searching. They were thorough. They were patient. They would not leave until the light of her family's lanterns was extinguished. Julia swallowed hard and led the children through the alley, then onto the deserted highway. The fog seemed less dense here, but every so often, shapes appeared along the roadside, tall and still. She forced herself not to look too long, not to give them a chance to identify her. Somewhere ahead, a distant glow pierced the mist. Headlights. Her old sedan waited, engine idling, doors unlocked. She had moved it the previous evening, hoping it might provide a way out if she needed it. Eli and Sophie climbed in quickly. Max sat between Julia's legs, gripping her arm. She took a deep breath, then started the car, tires crunching softly on the damp gravel. The watchers were not far behind. Julia could feel it in the fog, a sense of vigilance, a deliberate attention that moved with her. Shadows flickered in the mist. Orange glows appeared at intervals, the telltale sign of jack-o'-lanterns placed deliberately along the streets she had just traversed. They were marking her path. She drove slowly at first, keeping to the fog's edge. Every turn felt perilous. Every intersection might reveal figures, silent and patient, ready to block her escape. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Halfway out of town, the fog began to lift slightly. Julia dared to glance in the rearview mirror. Shapes moved, hazy and indistinct, at the very edge of visibility. Not chasing, not advancing, but observing, waiting for her to make a mistake. Eli broke the silence. "Mom, are they gone?" Julia swallowed. "Not really. Just not here." Sophie whispered. "Will they follow us?" "They might," Julia admitted, "but we have to keep moving." The highway stretched ahead. The fog thinned. Trees lining the road loomed like silent sentinels, shadows stretching across the pavement. The highway lights flickered. At the first real sign of civilization, a diner up ahead, she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. The first real light that didn't feel threatening. She stopped at the diner, parked at the far edge of the lot. The children were quiet, staring out the windows, half expecting masked figures to appear in the mist behind her. Julia stepped out, glanced around. Nothing. Just the normal hum of distant traffic, the low murmur of a few late-night patrons inside. For the first time in hours, she let herself breathe. They were alive, all 3 of them. Yet as she returned to the car, a flicker at the edge of the mist caught her eye. One single pumpkin, small, crude, flickering orange light, sitting atop a roadside mailbox. The flame inside moved as though breathing. Her stomach turned. The notes, the marks, the fog, the masks, it wasn't over. Not really. "They're still here," she whispered, voice low, almost to herself. Eli, sitting in the back seat, looked worried. "Are we safe?" She hugged him, then Sophie and Max in turn. "For now," she said. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. Grasmere had released its claim on them tonight, but the shadows, the ritual, the fear, they would follow. Halloween had come anyway, no matter the warnings, the bans, the silences of decades. It had come, and some part of it would never leave. The family drove on, the highway stretching endlessly, the fog thinning but never fully gone. Behind them, the faint flicker of pumpkin light lingered at the town's edge, a quiet reminder that survival had a cost, that the watchers, the rituals, and the weight of Grasmere's forgotten sins had only spared them, not freed them. Julia held her children close, silent, aware that Halloween had not ended. Not for them, not truly. Somewhere in the fog, the town waited, patient, deliberate, watching and ready for the next year. And on the horizon, just past the haze, a single jack-o'-lantern flickered again, tiny, distant, and smiling.